Good morning. Welcome. Good morning. Welcome to Community Voice. I'm your host, Keith Parris, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Good morning, Debo.
Good morning, sir.
Uh, good morning, Jermaine.
Good morning there, sir.
How are you this morning?
Hey, well, I can't complain. Ain't nobody listening.
They listening. They
So
just
I
don't want to
figured it
hear
out.
it. They listening.
I figured it out. Ain't nobody listening. So
Oh, they
Watch-
listening. They just don't want to heard it.
they don't want to heard it.
They don't want to had heard it. No.
Boy, this dude here, boy. This dude here.
There is a. I saw this this app on Black Jeopardy Sunday night, and it's called. Let's see, W. It's the Who All Gonna Be There app.
Keith, what about who ain't gonna be there?
Right. But I just love it because I thought, yeah, we do say who all gonna be
Yeah.
there. Like, hey, Jermaine, going down. Who
Yeah.
all gonna be there? So anyway, let me know your history.
That's it. You
That's
gotta
Black
know your
History
history.
Month.
You know, I'm feeling a little some kind of way, man, because we didn't get no hood fact though.
Yeah,
Man,
man,
you
we'll
know-
have to double up tomorrow, man.
Oh yeah, you know. I mean, I got a whole lot in
Double
the
up
chamber.
tomorrow,
Yeah,
man.
I got a whole lot. In the
Let
chamber.
me do this. As you know, we have a list of books that suggested reading for Black History Month. The first book, one of just the great books. When I started off in my little militancy, I read James Cole and C. Eric Lehman. Yeah, Black Theology. But The Cross and the Lynching Tree by Dr. James Cone. The Cross and the Lynching Tree. This is a great book. And we'll kind of get into this because our guest this morning has written his own book, The Cross of Christ in the African American Christian Religious Experience, none other than the Reverend Dr. Demetrius K. Williams. Middle name's not Keith, but
Middle name is Kelvin.
Kelvin. What's that? Welcome, man.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here today.
Just to do a background, those who have been listening, this started last year prior to the election, and I wanted to do this series of conversations with faith leaders in our beloved community. And part of what precipitated that was I'd gone over to Perkins, and after the program, and I saw Pastor John McVicker. And he said, Keith, come here, sit down. Oh, man, what's happening? He said, man, have you seen this Project 2025? I said, yeah, kind of. And so just going through that whole document, and it just precipitated that we need to have this conversation about the intersection of faith, religion, justice, and then politics. And my first guest was Reverend Dr. Richard Shaw. Second guest was student minister William Muhammad. Because what we have a diversity of faith traditions and religious practices. And so, and then last week it was Pastor Walter Lanier. And so this week we have with us an educator, a pastor, a leader. I got to tell this story. You know, I love Black preachers. I love Black preachers. I am a Black preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, you know, that we do is that when we get to introduce another Black preacher, oh man, you know. So Pastor was over preaching for us, and I had to introduce him. Man, I got up. I just laid it out. You know, I mean, it was just like, oh, just laid it out. And then I thought I had the killer, Jermaine. I said, not only is he a fisherman, he's a fisherman.
Oh, no.
Pastor got up behind me and said, no, I'm just Demetrius.
Real humble. Killed all the accolades.
Oh man, you know, because you got that setup. So let's talk about Demetrius Williams. How did you get to this point?
You want the long route or the short
We got
route?
2 hours.
How did I get to this point?
Well, I'm saying in terms of who you are. I mean,
Gotcha.
just the
Well,
evolving of who you are.
Well, I am a native Milwaukeean. I was born here in Milwaukee. When I was coming up, folk asked me where was I born. I said in Wauwatosa, because I was born at the old county hospital, which became, I believe, Freighter. So I didn't, I wanted to be kind of, classist. I was born in Wauwatosa, not, but at any rate, born and raised in this city. And if you really want to get a sense of my own kind of spiritual, mental, emotional formation, coming up in the early 60s, well, late 60s, early 70s, dealing with issues of race. I went to Fratney Street School and had some interactions on the east side where we were chased home by young white kids from in Whitefish Bay. And so I was raised, unfortunately, with a highly racial consciousness of what was going on in the world at the age of 6 or 7, being chased home, called Jungle Bunny, and all kinds of other things. But there were really two kind of existential realities that shaped me. One was the reality of death. My grandfather died when I was 4, and I saw parents and everybody crying, and so I'm trying to understand what this reality is, that everyone is crying over the death of my grandfather. So the reality that I didn't come here to stay, right? That I had an expiration date kind of shaped a purpose within me. I said, if I'm going to be here, it at least has to have some meaning. So the existential reality of mortality, and then living in a world shaped by this deeply effective racial consciousness or racial reality is what really kind of formed my being in the world. And it's no surprise that at an early age, I sought deeper meaning to reconcile these two realities. And so being raised in church, my grandfather was a pastor. He pastored Unity Baptist Church. Oliver Williams, my uncle Herman Pryor. So I was raised in the Black Baptist Church. And so at the age of 18, I made a commitment. Being raised in the church don't mean you have a personal commitment, but at 18, I did make a personal commitment to Christ. And what my uncle told me in sage advice, he said, nephew, this is Herman Pryor, he said, the days of being in a cotton field and in the pulpit, the next day are over. He said, you need to educate yourself. And so that's what I did. I sought to educate myself, not only the Bible, but history. And I'm going to speed this up, but it's important to make this point too, that in that process of conversion, I had a second conversion experience my first semester at UWM in '82, when I took a course, an Africology course, that's what it was called at the time, on African American religion and studying about the slave trade and how Africans were snatched and put in the hulls of ships. And I think I went through a baptism in the Middle Passage, meaning that I absorbed that narrative. I was swept up into the narrative of Black struggle. And so that has shaped me early in my ministry, two conversions, to Christ and then to the struggle for African American liberty, freedom, justice.
Now, what he didn't tell you was that he went to my alma mater,
UWM?
American Baptist.
Oh, yeah. I was at American Baptist. I did UWM for a year, and then folks talked to me about going to seminary. So I went down to Tennessee to American Baptist Theological School in 1983, and the conditions were not conducive to a northern boy down in the South. They had, I believe it was Griggs Hall. I'm up on the 3rd floor, and there's no insulation. They had cots.
That's what the freshmen were.
Yeah, and so they begged me to stay. They said, brothers, the Lord will work it out. I said, he's got to work it out in Milwaukee. So I left. I got there that morning, left that evening back. So I'm a one-day alum of
yeah, I remember the late Reverend Tommy Mims picked me up at the bus station. it was the hottest day ever. I thought my shoes was gonna melt, man. It was so hot. So we pull up on White Creek's Pike, and where the school is. And Tommy said, "Now, I don't want you to be disappointed. It's too late. It's too late." You know, if you go now, I didn't recognize the place. I mean, Griggs Hall is just it's amazing, man. Now. It's amazing campus. But oh man, that was so I was able to do a year. Was able to, well, I think the thing for me though, I still thought I could play basketball.
Gotcha.
And so, you know, I was like, well, let me go someplace. I was looking at Oral Roberts, but they were a little too strict. And let me shout out my good friend Reggie Royal, who's a graduate of Oral Roberts, Carlton Pearson, who's a graduate. He was the first Black Oral Roberts singer. That was a little bit. I was looking at Creighton, which was surprising. Okay. But anyway, so you got that. You went to Harvard.
Yes. Oh, well, once I finished, well, I went to UWM for a degree. I didn't know what I was going to do when I started, but my first semester, you know, before they had photocopy machines, there were mimeographs. So I got a mimeograph announcement that they were starting a comparative study of religion program. It may have been around already, but they were recruiting for students. And so I realized in my first semester that I wanted to pursue comparative religion. So my first semester was not that great. I was failing several courses, and I'll never forget in the Western Civilization course, the professor handed me back my exam with a D-, and he said, "Young man, you don't belong in college." And that struck me in ways that were unexplainable. I was devastated. But then I went home and I thought about it and I prayed about it. And I said, I'm going to either live out his reality or create a new reality. So I talked with, fortunately, there were wonderful Black advisors. Shout out to Susan Fields. She said, boy, what you need to do is learn how to read with comprehension and write. So I went to a basic skills course. And by my second semester, my sophomore year, I was on the dean's list with a 3.75. So
that's interesting because just there are a lot of people. One of my weaknesses is writing, right? And that has everything to do with, you know, lazy, some other things. But, you know, a lot of people who are authors, usually they've been writing, they keep journals, you know what I mean? And so the fact that you went in and had that remediation and then you can see the benefits of it.
It was fortunate to have that kind of support at the time, to have folk who from your own background and say, boy, now you pull it together. And certainly I did. I learned how to read for comprehension. If I didn't know a word, underline it. And writing only gets better when you do it. So
you when it looks like, and I don't know if this is the proper way to phrase this question, you love research.
Indeed. My wife would tell you, I much rather have a book sitting at a desk than to do just about anything. So it's sort of reflective of my own kind of personality, kind of introspective. Always have been, even as a young child. But yeah, I'm more comfortable around books than I am around people. So, but you know, being in ministry, I believe the Lord can help reshape your personality so that some of those qualities of interaction were developed on purpose. Because in ministry, you have to, you don't do ministry at home sitting at a desk. You interact with people.
But, you know, it's our lived experiences shape and form. Can I say, like, our personal theology, right? And so what was it, you know, you talked about the courses that shook. Was there anything else in your lived experience that informed your personal theology?
It did. When I talked about that, the conversion experience in the church on the side of my bed, praying one Sunday after church, wanting more. I shared this weekend in the sermon, living for the weekend. I was from 15 to 18, I was out there and in the clubs. I would see some of my high school teachers. They said, "Boy, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "Same thing you doing, party." I would use my sister's mascara, man, to darken my little mustache, and I put on a brim and a full length leather coat, so to kind of blend in. So from 15 to 18, I was there, but even by the time I was 17, 18, I was getting tired. Even my little part-time job, get my check on Friday, hanging out with the fellas. By Sunday, I'm borrowing money for cigarettes. So yeah, I did that. So I was looking for something deeper because there was always this kind of nagging emptiness that there had to be something more. So for me, that kind of shaped my reality that life has to have purpose. But then, and this is true, not made up, not rewriting my history. Going through that process, I said, well, what about Black folks? That was always a part of my consciousness because being raised in Milwaukee at a time where there was heightened tension in the city. As a matter of fact, when I was at fraternity, I'd heard my older siblings talk about well, they called it hunky day. On the last day of school, anybody who messed with you, you would get them. So we did that. I mean, I was firing people, anybody who messed with me. And then my friend, I was coming home, my friend Robbie down the street, little white boy. He's like, "Hey, how you doing?" I just punched him and I beat him down into the grass. My brother pulled me off, and when he did, I had a deep gash in my knee from a Coke bottle. And so I had to have 5 or 7 stitches. And on the way to the hospital, like, why does everything always happen to us when we retaliate against stuff that they do to us? So again, as I said, those experiences shaped me in such a way that the gospel has to speak significantly to people who are struggling and who are suffering, and not just a gospel promoted by those who are wealthy and well off. They want a Jesus that's passive and staid, who keeps the status quo, but we need a Jesus that's more radical. And I love to talk more about that.
No. I just, I keep telling y'all why Jesus ain't coming.
Mm-mm.
Oh, you got,
There you go.
dude, it ain't,
Mm.
it ain't happening. We joked during Black History Month last year. So we said on your wall, because we used to do this. We would have a picture of maybe Lincoln or Kennedy, then
Mhm.
Dr. King,
Mhm.
and white Jesus.
And white Jesus.
And so then I asked the question, so Barack Obama, he going on the wall, right? Who would you replace?
Oh Lord.
Now I knew what I thought the answer would be. I was thinking, well, white Jesus got to go. No, people, no, maybe Martin Luther King. Dude. No. And what I'm saying when I talk about that, because I don't want people, because Lord, I told the story about Metropolitan when we got that picture of Black Jesus, how Black people lost their mind. Jesus could not be Black. Now he can be a whole lot of things, but we'll talk about that in terms of how icons can shape and form.
Listen, Henry McNeil
Turner,
Turner, a
yes, sir.
bishop of the AME Church, I believe it was in 1895. He preached, I think, was at a National Baptist Convention. He preached the sermon, "God is a Negro," and Negroes were very, very
Very
upset. But he rationalized, I think, correctly, that every people in the world worship or an image of God reflective of their own image. So you go to China, guys look like China, Chinese people, Greece or wherever. He said the Negro is the only people that does not worship a God that looks like them. And that's why they can never rise up, in his words, to the status of manhood.
And I loved it. It was a declarative statement.
Mhm,
It was not a
mhm,
question.
mhm.
We're inside Community Voice, Faith, Justice, Politics, the Reverend Dr. Demetrius Williams. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
You're inside Community Voice on WNOV 860 AM and 106.5 FM with your host, Keith Parris.
Don't you love the production here, man?
You got to put it together, Jack. You got to put it together.
Anyway, we're joined in studio by Dr. Demetrius Williams, the pastor of Community Baptist Church, and we're inside of Faith, Justice, Politics. He is the author of the book, The Cross of Christ, an African American Christian Religious Experience. You had sent me an interview you had did with the Calvin Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first question that was asked, and so the question I'm going to ask, well, no, let me do this before I ask the question, because I want to, what has your faith tradition, what does it proffer when it comes to this issue of justice?
Well, I think part of the title, which I think is smaller print, but just as important: piety, politics, and protest. My faith tradition, being raised in the traditional Baptist implant church from the South to the North, started out in a storefront and eventually was able to purchase property. That kind of religious upbringing sort of gave you kind of a survival. You live right, God will bless you, but you don't shake things up. You develop your prayer life and you live out your values, but we were not necessarily encouraged to be active in community transformation, and I think that was intentional. In the book, I tried to chart how a passive Jesus, a Jesus who never said a mumbling word. And it's interesting, Jesus said a whole lot of words from the cross, but we were taught that he never said a mumbling word, and we were to adopt and appropriate that same kind of mentality. When you're beaten, you don't retaliate. When you're abused, you just pray. And so when I began to read many of what's called the freedom narratives, they used to be called slave narratives, but scholars who specialize in that area realized that they wrote those or had them written when they were in freedom. So they're called freedom narratives. Many of those who escaped slavery were deeply spiritual, and many of them recounted conversion experiences, but their piety did not hinder their political engagement or their protests. You can read Richard Allen, for example, the founder of the AME Church, when they walked out of St. George's Church because they were being mistreated. He went and founded not only the AME Church, but he talked about abolition and advocating for the freedom of his enslaved brothers. So he and his brother, I believe, were able to buy their freedom, but their piety did not hinder their political engagement. But some, unfortunately, appropriated a piety that made them passive. So I talk about a Christology of passivity, that you just live peacefully and quietly in the world. And if your circumstances happen to be unfavorable, well, just pray that God would change things, but don't be actively involved in change.
One of the things that, and obviously we talk about it a lot here during Black History Month, but you talked about the Middle Passage.
Mm-hmm.
And Christianity, for the most part, for many of us, was introduced to us when we got into the Western Hemisphere. And it wasn't immediately done. There were some problems that you had, with the slave master and understanding that. I think they said one of the contradictions would be is that if a person converts to Christianity, then they would have to be viewed as an equal.
Yes, set free. Yes,
set free, and that was problematic when you're looking at those bodies used to build the wealth of this country. And then it's estimated that maybe about 20% of the people came here were Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
You know, depending on what part of what part of Africa that it came from. So when we begin to talk about our introduction, us as descendants of African people here in the Western Hemisphere, um, was it? I think it's Pastor Williams up in Detroit. He was on Al Sharpton's program, and he said, "You know, it isn't God, but how we've been taught about God."
Correct.
So is it that had a purpose, right? In terms of, you know, everybody talks about the slave Bible, which was highly redacted.
Right.
You know, anything that talked about full human franchisement, anything that talked about liberation was removed, you know, from the Bible. That was then introduced to slaves. So how do we're now converted to Christianity? You talk about our piety, but how much of that was that we were spiritual people when we got here?
Peter Parris wrote a book several years ago, The Spirituality, I believe, of African American peoples. It has been realized from time immemorial. I believe it was Plato's Timaeus, and he comes into a city. They say, "Where have you been?" He says, "Oh, I just come from Ethiopia. Ethiopia, they're the most beloved of the gods." So even in the ancient world, it was understood that that people that they interacted with, people in Greece and in Rome, interacted with people in Africa, that they were deeply spiritual people. And that reality is reiterated. Another AME bishop, Reverdy C. Ransom, he wrote, well, he gave a speech. Can't remember the title, but he said that it may be the case, since Westerndom, Western Christianity has failed Christ, is up to African and African Americans now to live out the true kind of principles of Christianity. So even some African Americans throughout history appropriated the idea that somehow uh, black folk, whether it's true or not, they believe that black folk lived out the principles of Christianity to a degree different from their oppressors or enslavers. As a matter of fact, it was Howard Thurman in I believe the spirituals speak of life and death. He said that the slave undertook the redemption of a religion that the slave master had corrupted in his midst. So, and when I read some of the research, even some of the white observers said that black folk, they got too much Jesus, just too religious. So even there reminds me of Leroy Jones. You know, too much love. You know, nothing kills like too much love. So that whether that reality can be quantified or not, people have believed
I think it
that
was
kind
Richard
of idea.
Dawkins that said that he calls it the God gene, that all human beings have this thing where they're going to, and regardless of what you call it, there's this whole thing for something greater than life, you know, metaphysical
Mhm.
in terms of that. And in the book The Black Church, they had a whole thing where it was important, respectability. You talk about piety, but that whole piece of respectability and how that maybe became more important than seeking justice.
Yes. I think Kendi calls it uplift suasion. Um, some call it the politics of respectability. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham talks about it
You know,
in
that
her.
was my teacher.
Well,
2 years at Parkman. She taught at
well,
Parkman.
Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham.
She taught at Parkman.
Well,
Yes.
I met her when I in Massachusetts, at Boston, when I was pastoring Pleasant Hill. She and her husband, Judge Higginbotham, came to church on a couple of occasions, but she was also teaching at Harvard at the time, part time at the university and at the divinity school. But in her book, Righteous Discontent, the politics of respectability could be a double-edged sword. while African Americans did seek to rise up to levels of respectability, they were battling also the idea that if everybody could rise to this level of acceptability, then whites would accept them and they could get the rights they wanted. So it was a double-edged sword. Of course, people want to live lives of quality and be aspirational and to live up to certain standards. But the undercurrent was that if the whole race didn't rise up to that level, they will continue to be denied their rights. So it sort of reminds me, I've gotten rid of this notion statistics on black crime. Do we keep white on white crime, Asian on that? All of these things were designed until black folk can live up to a certain level, they're not worthy of rights. So you're keeping these statistics, which certainly don't mean anything to me anymore because human beings kill human beings no matter where they live.
And I think that pushes up against the construct of race and how we, it being something that is not biologically, real. But I think it was Dr. Hassan Jeffries who said that race is a construct, but racism is real.
Race, social scientists helped us to understand that race is a social construction. And part of that, through this example, before white folks became white, they were Anglo-Saxons, German, Italian. And before black folks became black, they were Akan, Yoruba,
Moor,
Ashanti, whatever. So with the rise of European colonialism and the encounter with darker peoples of the world, you began to hear more the language of whiteness. It was not always there, but the concept, the idea became an ideology. That was infused with value. For example, whiteness is pure. We know this. Whiteness is intelligence. Black is dirty. Black is inferior. So these constructs began to create real social realities. You're enslaved. You're not allowed to read. You can't go in certain spaces. So we took ideas that were not real. There's nothing biologically different about people other than maybe phenotype. And so take that idea and then construct the world.
Even when you were talking about the ancients who had traveled to Africa, they didn't say we wouldn't encounter black people. It said we encountered Ethiopians. Mm-hmm. It was where you were from. I mean, Shakespeare and Othello, he's a Moor, right? So the descriptor was your ethnicity.
Yeah, folks were aware of the ancient world of different ethnic groups.
Right. But there's certain condescension that went to, everybody is an other. But I'm just saying,
you had ethnocentric.
Exactly. I mean, and I think that even in Africa, y'all, I think, but that was really one of those things. And I've really been wrestling with black, growing up in a time where we embraced black, mm-hmm. right, which had been very negative. I could tell you that if I was at Fifth Street School, and I called Jermaine black, me and Jermaine, we rumbling.
Yeah.
That was not a compliment. And so doing what they call black consciousness, we accepted that. But then it just seems so reminiscent of America's apartheid, and where you would see signs of colors, and then you would see white, and that what black, what it represents. And so I think today it's kind of, for me anyway, is one of those things where it's rather nebulous. I will use it just because it's part of our daily language usage, but I hope that I could be more precise, even though I'm 400 years removed from my indigenous roots, where I began to understand that we use it. But because someone said that, if you talk to a group of Africans throughout the world, if you say black, they immediately say, you mean Americans, because Jamaicans are Jamaicans.
Unless, of course, you're in South Africa, where again you had apartheid, racial division. So you had Stephen Biko talk about black consciousness. So you do have that. So you're correct. South Africans can identify with you more because apartheid system was,
based
America. Yeah. So you have that similar consciousness.
So your faith tradition justice.
That was not a part of my faith. It developed over time. I'll give you a quick example. When I was at UWM in the early 80s, I had a friend, a good friend. He was a Christian. I was a Christian. He happened to be white. I believe he was out at Elmbrook Church at the time. They had a very strong ministry at UWM. And he was like, hey, are you going to go with me? We're going to be protesting against abortion. That was not that was not an issue in my faith tradition, but apartheid was. I said, well, okay, you're going to come with me to protest apartheid. He was like, well, no. So I realized then that our faith traditions represented different kind of values in terms of how you engage the political arena.
And I want to focus on this a little bit and later in the conversation, where I just think you did just a marvelous job defining terms like fundamentalism, evangelism. There are only two evangelical religions in the world, which would be Christianity and Islam, in terms where they actively go out. Most people, you're culturally what you are. If you Sikh, you're born Sikh. That's what you're. And I think even for us, we could even make that argument. Baptist born, Baptist bred, Baptist dead, right?
Interestingly, just a little historical addition to that, Buddhism initially was one of the, and Zoroastrian, but Buddhism really did spread from India to Korea to China. So that was sort of a missionary religion also.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So and then it gets into problematic. So let's talk about the cross.
All right.
Let's talk about the cross. I'm going to do it from my rather myopic lens. The cross, the introduction of the cross, was an instrument of state-sponsored terrorism, right?
Indeed. Didn't begin with the Romans, but they took it.
They put it on steroids.
Yes,
in terms.
indeed.
I mean, because it was. I heard someone say that crucifixion requires a witness.
Yes.
And so part of this is, and we'll even see it in our enslaved experience, where if it's corporal punishment from a disobedient enslaved African, but during the time of Jesus, this was used by the Roman Empire. And the one thing that didn't happen in Rome was that this whole idea of pushing back against the Roman status quo wasn't going to happen. When you read about Pilate was brutal in terms of his control of Palestine. And
he had a friend in Herod also,
who was collaborator. So when I read this, and we do have the cross and the lynching tree, right? That again, and lynching is defined as extrajudicial punishment, but the cross was purposeful in terms of the purpose of Rome. How do we get from a tool of terrorism, a symbol of terrorism, right, to for lack of a better term, a symbol of salvation?
I would say very, very slowly. Part of it, early Christians had to deal with a very stark reality. If you could not explain why Jesus, who was believed to be the Christ, died on the cross, Christianity would have failed from the beginning. Because and even in terms of Judaism, I believe it's Deuteronomy, either 22, 23, I can't remember, 23, 22, where it says, "Cursed is anyone who who is hung on a tree." So I think that was the great struggle for Paul. And we have to remember that Paul's letters predate the writing of the Gospels by about at least 20 years. Mark maybe 69 or 70, but Paul was writing letters in the 50s until he was executed maybe somewhere around 60 or 63. So he is one of the earliest witnesses to how this language of the cross developed. Now, if you look at his earlier letters, First Thessalonians, one of the earliest letters, he doesn't talk a lot about the cross. It was not I believe, until his encounter. I don't want to get too much in the New Testament interpretation. It depends on how you date the letters, Galatians, what have you. But we know Thessalonians is the earliest, and Romans is the last extant letter. But I believe it's really Paul who pushed this idea of the cross as a significant symbol of redemption. Although the gospel writers, you have that emphasis on the cross. In the Gospel of John, that his glorification. But John is much later, in the late '90s or even first century. But let me speed this up. Paul had several opponents who challenged his emphasis on the cross. That's why in First Corinthians, where he says the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the wisdom of God and the power of God. So for lack of evidence, I think that we could say Paul is perhaps the one who really promoted the cross, not only as a symbol of redemption. I want to put a pin there. It's not just for atonement. He saw his emphasis, his rhetoric, what he called the message of the cross, as an interesting kind of intervention into the crisis about Gentiles becoming a part of the newly revised, or should I say, newly constituting people of God, because you had certain of his kinsfolk who said they need to be circumcised and keep the law. Paul emphasized the cross as eliminating the necessity of those ethnic identity symbols. So for Paul, the cross cancels out anybody's ethnic privilege. In Philippians 3, he said, although I had all these, I was Jew, a Hebrew, born of Hebrew, zeal. He said, I count all that as a loss for knowing Christ and to be crucified with him. So for him, the cross was a way to establish all those who became a part of the covenant people on an equal footing. So no one's ethnic identity or identity symbols would be privileged in this group.
We're inside Faith, Justice, Politics. The Reverend Dr. Demetrius Williams. We're going to take a break. And the phone line's open, 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. Take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Are you thinking about buying a home? Get the information you need from industry experts. Housing Resources HUD approved workshops will explain the home buying process, share credit requirements,
WNOV 860 AM and 106.5 FM with your host, Keith Parris.
All right, welcome back. And again, we're joined in studio by the Reverend Dr. Demetrius Williams, the pastor of Community Baptist Church. This would be a different discussion when we talk about that many of us grew up in missionary Baptist churches. I did a little history on the missionary Baptists. But it's interesting because our church covenant that a lot of us use is developed by the missionary Baptists, which is kind of, but we were talking about that. You had set it up with the cross and the seeming contradiction. And then you talked about things. You talked about atonement, right? But did we ever get, and again, I don't know if this is applied or if it's applicable, this idea of justice in the cross. I know when they asked you at the Calvin Institute why you wrote the book, you went in and you said it was the cross of Martin Luther King. What do you mean by that?
Well, King understood, I think, as many African Americans understood. So King was perhaps the most articulate that we know of on the justice of the cross. But I mentioned a gentleman earlier by the name of Bishop Reverdy C. Ransom. I think he predates King, although he did not have a movement behind him as King did, a global movement, but he was the most articulate preacher of the cross of the early 20th century because he directly related the cross to social justice issues in America. He said the cross eliminates any hindrance from African Americans being full citizens in the United States. He said because Christ's cross reconciled the enmity between two groups, quoting Ephesians. So he said that when Christ was crucified on the cross, he said, you have not had a more bitter antagonism between peoples than at that time. And so for him, his argument that the cross reconciles individuals, groups together, but also eliminates any prejudice. Because we know this in the spirituals that we sing. If you can't preach like Peter or sing like Paul, just say Jesus loves and died for all. So that idea that Jesus died for all people to make them one, as Paul says in Galatians 3:28, in Christ, there's no longer Jew or Greek, no longer slave or free, no longer male and female, all are one. He begins in Galatians 3:1 on the cross of Christ, who bewitched you, before whose eyes Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. By the time he ends that argument, he says that in Christ we're all one. So even in Paul, the cross was a way to mitigate tension with the inclusion of Gentiles. If you recall in Galatians 2, he confronted Peter to his face because when those from James came from Jerusalem to Antioch, which was the first Jewish Christian mission to Gentiles, said Peter ate and associated with Barnabas. But then when they came, he said he pulled back. So Paul saw that as an injustice that needed to be corrected by the cross.
Peter was eating chitlins.
Yeah, he may have been eating chitlins and pork chops. But Paul saw his behavior as, he said, that's contradictory to the gospel. So we have spent too much time talking about the theology of the cross, the atonement of the cross. We have not drawn out more of the emphasis of the justice of the cross.
What about the co-opting of the cross? And I think just two examples. It was the symbol used by the Crusaders to go in and to basically steal Palestine. It was the symbol used here in America by the Ku Klux Klan. How do you, when you look at those imageries, it was, I never thought about this. Metropolitan has a cross on the front of the church. And now they have this kind of a beige, but then the church was brown. So at night, you had this white cross. And there were a group of Muslims who protested outside the church because of the cross. That because they've looked at it as the cross was used for tyranny, right? It was used for fear. So even, I never pronounce the word, but it's iconography.
Iconography.
Yeah, iconography of that. Symbols matter.
Indeed.
I mean, what we see, that word logos is a symbol. Like one of probably the most ubiquitous symbol in the world is the Nike swoop. You see the swoop, Nike. We see the cross. Well, we think a lot of things when we see the cross.
Well, part of the appropriation of the cross for the purposes of empire that began with Constantine. In the early 4th century, he was fighting. His father had died, and he's trying to unite the empire, the last surviving opponent. And he's been playing around. His family members have appropriated Christian, his mother, I believe, sister. But at any rate, he has a vision. At least this is how church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, how he tells the story that he saw a symbol of the cross. By this sign conquer. So it's with the empire established by Constantine, where the cross became a symbol of power and might. It represented now more the ruling class, because before then, I believe, the image of Jesus was a shepherd. You could see in some of the catacombs, he's seen as a shepherd, but by the time empire takes him, he's sitting on the throne with a scepter.
Right.
So the appropriation of the cross, many would say, began with when that symbol was taken over by empire. And now the cross, not just a symbol of redemption, now is a symbol of power, of domination, of order in the world. And so when you get to the Crusades a few centuries later, it's not surprising that will be on their standards and on their flags, because it had already been a part of their culture for centuries after Constantine.
And I think so some of the earlier symbols of the early church was the fish.
Yes, ichthus is the Greek term. Jesu Christou Huios Theos Soter, Jesus Christ, Son of God and Savior. So he was known as the fish. That was a symbol where Christians could know that other Christians were around during persecution, and they could be saved. So again, with the rise of European colonialism, beginning with Portugal, then Spain, and everyone else got involved, British, Dutch. There were, as a matter of fact, when Prince Henry initiated the exclusive trade in sub-Saharan Africans, his ships were outfitted with a cross, because he was the governor of a military organization, the Military Order of Jesus Christ. So he had all of his ships outfitted with the cross. So the cross was co-opted by empire, and even the if I would say the theology of the cross was then used, because the cross now just was a symbol of, okay, your soul is saved. Oh, but your body belongs to me. So just concentrating on the redemptive side of the cross meant that human beings could be exploited, because the justice of the cross was removed. Even when it was a practice, although maybe not law, that you could not enslave another Christian. So how do you enslave millions of people and then try to convert them to Christianity, but yet keep them enslaved? There was all kinds of theological gymnastics that were done to do that, and I try to talk about that in the book.
And it's one of those things where we become more of a theology, be a beatific. You'll die, you get your reward when you get to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And it where we talk about atonement and what it was. You mentioned, or you talked about fundamentalism
Mm-hmm.
in Christianity, and a lot that went with that. I don't know if we go back as far as the Great Awakening, but certainly I would just say in terms of the Pentecostal movement,
Mm-hmm.
Azusa. And so what we're looking at in terms of this fundamentalist, so just describe just a definition of what would be fundamentalist Christianity.
Well, fundamentalism developed really with the rise of modernity. You had in the 20s, I believe it was the Scopes monkey trial, where you had the rise of modern biblical criticism. It's called higher criticism. But at any rate, where they began to uh, uh, interpret the Bible from a historical perspective, what brought into question ideas, say, of creation. Was there really a 6-day creation? Not necessarily denying that, because actually the Genesis creation follows even the evolutionary model. Last thing created is human beings, so it follows that model. But you had a reaction by conservative Christians that somehow questioning the virgin birth, the divinity of Christ. So the fundamentals were written by a group of conservative scholars, all white, no black folk were involved to participate. Matter of fact, they didn't even distribute the fundamentals to black churches. So fundamentalism is more of a modern reaction to modernity, where you want to reaffirm for the faith community those core beliefs: the divinity of Christ, the 6-day creation. Like Jonah was really in the body, in the belly of a whale. So yeah, it was a reaction to modernity.
How much of that, but then also just the the lack of education. I think that, where you're not, I can remember when I went to college and my pastor was kind of, he said, well, they deny God. Well, I went to religious schools. There was never denial. I went to Catholic schools, never denial of God. But when you talk about science, that's a different discussion. I'm constantly going back and forth with listeners that religion has its lane, but science has its lane.
Yeah,
And they try to coexist in this world for people who are believers, even though practically we accept science. Everything we do is kind of, not everything, but most that we do is based on science. I was watching you looking at your watch. Well, that's science. That doesn't negate God.
No.
It just gives us it's a functionality in terms of how we're able to adapt and survive in this environment.
Yeah, I believe in the Catholic Church, they call it non-overlapping magisteria, or teachings, that the teachings can exist side by side because they're designed for different purposes.
Mhm.
Science is not designed to give you purpose and meaning in life, to help you resolve the struggles of being human in the world. Science is designed to, if you're sick, they can provide medicine for you. If you need to fly, they got planes. So sometimes they may, in some individuals' mind, conflict, but really, religion accomplishes what science cannot for the human spirit and the human striving for meaning.
We have a caller. Welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Real good. Thank you, Keith, for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I wanted to pose 3 questions to you and your guest, if I could.
Yes. This is almost like Cat Bay. Yes. Yes.
My first question is, do you think religion is a human construct? My second question would be, do you believe the Bible is the divine word of God? And my third question is, do you believe that practicing other religions, for example, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, etc., are legitimate avenues to have a spiritual relationship with God? And I'll get off the phone and I'll just
let's do this. Go back, because we didn't write the questions. I told you these are 50.
Okay.
So let's do your first question.
Do you think religion is a human construct?
Well, that's the question of I think of revelation. That's a big issue in religious studies. As a matter of fact, I'm teaching a course on theories of religion as we speak, And I'll give you the religious studies response first. And that is that what is it about human beings since the beginning of time and all over the world that there's something innate, it seems, within human beings that has a tendency to seek something outside of the human self, to seek something that's greater, something that brought this world into existence. So I would say religion is an abiding part of all humankind. But I think what you're asking is more a theological question that grows out of more of a Christian perspective. And that is that not all religions are of equal value, because we have been nurtured in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So it's hard for us because it says in John, I am the way, 14, the way, the truth, and the life. But it also says that all who call upon me, Lord, Lord, won't make it in. So for me, I think one should have a sense of humility, no matter where one stands, because if you think about even in Christianity, there are thousands of denominations with differing interpretations of religious practice and belief. So for me, Jesus said, "Those who are with me." When the disciples saw someone preaching in His name, they said, "Oh, we told him to stop." He said, "No, don't stop there." So there are going to be differences of opinion, but Jesus, I think, can embrace more than I think we're willing to believe or accept.
So may I ask, religion is culturally derived.
Yes.
It's our culture. If God is universal, why then, based on we all have our cultural expression of religion, then why would it not be that another, I just read Dr. Bishop Tutu's book, God is Not a Christian, where he talks about Ubuntu, like it's the humanity. I've always struggled, I think, because what Jesus was saying, look, if they're doing what is divine, why are you questioning it? And I said yesterday, we major in the minors, what you call something. Your second question, man, and I want you to do it repeat it the way you asked it, because I think there was something in there that I thought kind of stuck out to me. So your second question.
Do you believe the Bible is divine, is the divine word of God?
I believe that the Bible, as the Timothy says, is God breathed. But if the Bible is divine, then that makes it a God. That's bibliolatry, the worship of the Bible. Anything that has any human interaction means that it cannot be divine. So inspiration, the Bible as divine is problematic, but the Bible as derived from divine inspiration, I can deal with that. But yet the Bible still needs to be interpreted. Because if the Bible is divine, the Bible says, slaves, be submissive to your masters. Then why were we saying slavery is wrong? The Bible said women, in 2 Timothy 2:11, that a woman should keep silent because she sinned. It wasn't Adam. So women should not be able to even be involved in church. But yet we have found ways to interpret the Bible, understanding the historical development of certain ideas. So to me, that statement is more an example of a certain group trying to maintain the authority of interpretation of the Bible.
And part of that is the fundamentalism where the Bible, this is a relatively new concept, that the Bible is the unerred word of God, right? And I think anytime you go and you have studied, you will go in and you will find that you have to take context of time, place, history, when we're doing it. We've been taught that, it's like when you argue for Christians, which has superiority, the Old Testament or the New Testament, right? I mean, so again, it's how we've been taught about the Bible, I think. But I agree. I heard when I said divine, but there is a certain ethnocentricity that goes with religion, like that we're the right ones. In the Old Testament, it was always competing gods. My God is bigger than your God. My God is more powerful than, and it's human beings. And I think that is Pastor and we were talking, and I used the quote that the late Chief Parker of the LA Police Department used when he was talking about brutality of his police officers. He said, unfortunately, we recruit from the human race. Let's say religion is a human, we create religion. And so all our humanity, good and bad, is probably found in that religion. Your third question.
Before we move on to that, I just wanted to touch on a point that the pastor just mentioned, was making references to women and biblical times. And we're looking back through it. I mean, we're in the 21st century, so we're looking back and we're trying to understand and place context in scriptures that during a time in which women really had no rights. And so now here we are in the 21st century and operating under a different set of social and economic norms, so to speak, and attempting to interpret scriptures of the Bible based upon how people lived and were governed and were socialized during those times.
No, I agree with you. I think we're saying the same thing. It's important. Interpretation is important. Years ago, I was pastoring in Boston, and there was a guy who said, I'm a biblical literalist. God said it. I believe it. That settles it. I said, well, go and sell all that you have and give it to the poor. He said, well, hold on now. What that means? I said, so you can't just say, I believe it. God said, I believe it. You need interpretation before you get the application, because there are places in the Bible, in the law, in Leviticus, where it says, if you believe your wife is unfaithful, take her to the priest. He can devise a concoction for her to drink, and if she lives, she's faithful. If she dies, we don't want to continue to practice that. There's a lot of things in the Bible. Even Jesus said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. We don't want to cut out off hands and eyes. So yeah, we still have to interpret the Bible for every generation.
Or the woman caught in adultery.
Right.
Was there somebody else with her? Because it had to be two to do adultery, right?
Yeah.
So, but and the penalty was more harsh for women than it was for men. And now this is just me. I think that this is why I think Jesus was so adamant about divorce. Now people go, oh no, because women couldn't support themselves. They're going to be forced into prostitution. You're going to have problems with the children. So the practicality, again, time, context, what was going on during that time becomes important. Third question. I don't know why I'm jumping in. I'm not the guest.
But my third question was, do you believe that practicing other religions, example, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, etc., are legitimate avenues to have a spiritual relationship with God?
I did a paper years ago in seminary entitled Paul and Gentile Religions. Paul mentions in Romans, where he's talking about the law, he said that there are some Gentiles who may not have the written law, but there's a law written in their hearts where they do the right things, even though they don't have the written law. And he said, and Jews have the written law, and sometimes they didn't do the right things. So he said, Jews will be judged by the law, and Gentiles will be judged by the law written in their hearts. I think God is much bigger than we. Sometimes our God is too small. I think God created the world. God can deal with other religions in a manner that God chooses. Because there are some folks who have been Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist that have been more kind, loving, and gentle. And why should they lose out? Because they have not heard of the name Jesus.
Are you saying that having said that, legitimizes their approach to a relationship with God?
I believe that we're all going to be surprised. Because even Jesus said, all those who call upon me, Lord, Lord. And you got a lot of people calling, Lord, Lord, will not make it in. So I just want to make it to the party and be surprised. Muhammad, how are you doing? Confucius, good to see you.
Malcolm said the kids born in the oven don't make them biscuits.
That's right.
So just because you proclaim it really, and I think the story of the Samaritan is that I think this idea that religion and law and politics is really about relationships with other human beings. When Jesus asked the question, how can you love a God that you cannot see but hate your brother that you do see, it was more the practical application of love. And how do I I said to people, if your religion doesn't make you better,
Amen.
you need a different religion.
I agree.
All right, man. Appreciate you.
Gentlemen, thank you for the excellent discussion.
Oh, thank you, sir. Take care.
Caller, welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Keith,
Hey, what's happening?
and good morning to your guest.
Good
This
morning.
is Rick calling you long distance from Germany.
All
Can you
right.
hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
worldwide, man.
Okay. I just want to say that I believe in the supernatural. I believe somewhat in Jesus. I do not believe that the Bible is absolute, infallible, and unchangeable. I believe that it is a book full of bias and unfairness, and I believe that the original writings contain some science, but that science 6,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, was kept away from the common people, just like writing and reading was kept away from the common people. The priests and the people they chose to educate got a little background in the sciences. Today, I believe in the apocalypse, but I believe the Revelation as a book was seriously changed. And I believe it was a prose book as opposed to a metaphor and poetry book as we have today. I'm done, fellas.
Okay.
I'm just.
I got to hear your take on that, Doc. So I know I got to hear your
Well,
take.
to a certain degree, one might say that there are elements where one has to nod and say, yes, is the Bible biased? To some degree, I mentioned before, you have the idea that women are cursed. In Genesis, what is it, 3:26, it says that your desire shall be for your husband, and you shall serve him, and he shall rule over you. So we know that's a gender bias, right? And then, as I stated before, is there a bias in terms of people outside of the covenant people? I mean, Gentiles were considered dogs. So you may have an ethnic bias. So we understand that within the context of human society at that time and human development. But many of those biases still exist. And people seek to use the Bible to justify those biases. And so I'll never forget a book by William Jones written in the 70s, which is called Is God a White Racist? Because if God has been used to justify all of the atrocities around the world perpetuated by people in power, then God must be on the side of those who are promoting injustice in the world. But we have a counter narrative that says, no, God is on the side of the oppressed. People may seem as if they're prospering, but God is really. So, yeah, that biases exist in all ancient literature.
What is, I'm being really simplistic here. What did a Jewish book written for Jewish people? I mean, certainly the Old Testament. I mean, it was not a universal book, or collections of writings. This was for a particular people. So their biases, their cultural norms is encapsulated in their writing.
Have
right?
you read some of the Psalms where their children be dashed against?
Oh,
I
man.
mean, you don't read that during worship.
So question. So
that was, I love the beginning of that, because how can we sing a song in straight letters? But you go down and hear what they talking about, what they singing about is that's a Hebrew spiritual.
So my question is, for some of that content or context, it was written from that person's point of view that was living in that particular time, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really not the word of God. That's a word of man that was put into the book.
It's interesting. You say that, Jermaine. I have a Catholic education, so I went to mass regularly. It's very interesting that in our Protestant Bibles, the words of Jesus is in red.
Yeah.
When the gospel is read, you stand. there's a certain reverence that they give to the words of Jesus
Mhm.
over and beyond any other scripture or any
Yeah.
other litany that they're doing, which I always thought was really kind of fascinating. And it gets to sometimes that I said that you can go to certain institutions, religious institution, Christian institution, and if you bump into Jesus, that was an accident. Because we preach everything. I mean, and I'm just going in terms of, because we kind of gotten away. It was interesting that there was a professor, I forget this brother's name, and I don't know if he was part of Tavis Smiley's State of the Black Union, and someone asked him a question, and they said, do you worship Jesus? He said his response was, I love Jesus that I follow Jesus. And that gets into, again, another icon when we get to Brother Lanier read something from the Black Psychiatric Association about white Jesus and the damage that image of white Jesus has done to the psyche of African people, which is kind of, it make God any less God, yeah.
Well, in terms of religion and justice, focusing on the kind of Jesus that was promoted, there is a very interesting narrative by Josiah Henson. Josiah Henson escaped, I believe it was in the 1840s, from Tobacco, Maryland, and he wrote several editions of his narrative. But he talks about what he calls his unpardonable sin. He talks about his conversion experience, and it's dramatic, it's beautiful. He talks about how once he met Jesus, who loved him, he could do anything imaginable. So he became a preacher and a trusted overseer for his master, who was in debt and wanted him to take about 200 other enslaved persons up the Ohio River to Kentucky to his brother so he could escape the creditors. Once they got into freedom, I believe he said somewhere, I guess in Cincinnati, wherever they were, he said they started calling him from the shore. You're free, come here, get off the barge. You're free. You're in freedom land. He said, I assumed the role of the captain and pushed the barge back off into the river and got the enslaved persons safely to my master's brother. He said, I had absorbed too much of pro-slavery preaching at the time. And pro-slavery preaching promoted a Christ, as I said, who was humble, did not buck against the status quo, who was quiet, accepted suffering without question. And whether people know it or not, before Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, she had read Henson's narrative and invited him to have a conversation with her. So the character of Uncle Tom is based upon the life experience of Josiah Henson. But he realized too late that he had absorbed too much of the kind of Christ that was promoted among the enslaved. And so he became an advocate for abolition and tried to reverse that. But I think that is still happening today with some of these conservative evangelical churches that tell us, oh, we just pray, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. That's why we have the results of the presidency that we have, because evangelical folks have promoted, they say, vote your values. My values are freedom and justice and equity. People have the freedom to, whether they want to have a child or not, that's their decision. I was talking to a guy, he said, well, I don't agree with everything going on that Trump doing, but I do agree with the transgender folk have not done anything to me. They're not trying to change policy to roll back everything that we've struggled for.
And you pointed this out in the book that that Black people will skew socially conservative. And so then we think that we have an alliance with folks who, and look, evangelicals, this whole abortion thing is something that started back in the late 70s, early 80s, and it turned.
They wanted to bring Catholics into the conservative.
There you go. You're listening to Community Voice. Callers, we see you. Man, you lit up the phone lines. Man. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
You're inside Community Voice on WNOV 860 AM and 106.5 FM with your host, Keith Parris.
It's me. Man, you have precipitated some questions.
Okay.
I have one. Do you and your guests believe or recognize that some scriptures have been interpolated?
Interpolated.
Interpolated, thank you. And if so, can either of you give an example of any particular scripture that you believe and understand that has been interpolated? Interpolated. Okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I could give one. It's in 1 Corinthians 14, 34 and 35, where Paul is talking about keeping silent or speaking in church. He's talking about prophets. If you read chapter 4, if one prophet is speaking, let the other keep silent, because God is not the author of confusion. Some scholars believe that perhaps a scribe in the early 2nd century along the same lines as Timothy, where it says if a woman wants to learn anything, she should keep silent, and if she wants to know, ask her husband at home. So when it says women be silent in that passage where it's talking about prophets, it's not talking about any particular gender. It just says one prophet is speaking. Some scholars believe that was an interpolation, because in some, and this is something that most people don't know, but as a scholar of New Testament, we know about the manuscript tradition. There are thousands of manuscripts, and text critics have to adjudicate what's the original or the most authentic reading they could come up with. So in some earlier versions, that's called a gloss. It was written on the side of the text, but later became included in that text. So that kind of text criticism is, I would not share that in a sermon or anything like that. The role of a pastor is not to create problems, but to try to eliminate problems. But as a scholar who teaches in seminaries and universities, folks who take courses in the New Testament know that there are very different manuscript traditions, some that are more trustworthy than others. For example, the King James Version is based upon a later, more, shall I say, less authentic text called Textus Receptus. And so the King James Version is not the inspired version of the Bible.
What?
It's just one that King James and all those scholars wrote so beautifully.
Okay. Let me call her. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Keith, this is Johnny. How you doing?
Hey, John.
Good. The thing about Jews talking about Gentiles being dogs, that's one of those illusions that Christians have said for years. I know I've been through a lot of Christian training myself. I wasn't raised Jewish, Keith. I was raised Lutheran, mainstream Lutheran, ELCA, the World Council of Churches, Lutheran World Federation. That was my actual youth. I didn't get confirmed. So it was Vietnam War, then I dropped. My parents took me out. And then I had to learn the rest of it, Buddhism and Judaism, all by myself, or with professors and stuff. But no, Jews do not think Gentiles are dogs. If you look at Noah's story, when he comes off the ark, there's the Noah covenant with the rainbow, and he has the covenant, Genesis 9, I think it is. And this begins what's called the righteous Gentiles. It means the world who are not Jewish are called Noahites if they're righteous. And Job was not a Jew.
All right. Appreciate you, John.
In Philippians 3, either 4 or 5, he says, beware of the dogs. I believe he's reversing a slur. So while this is still debated, I think there's evidence, even in the Psalms, the dogs surround me. So there's evidence that there may not have been widespread, but there's evidence that that was a slur against Gentiles.
But there was the condescension that insulated groups. All groups looked at had a derisive term for others. If you weren't part of the clan, barbarian.
Greek. If you're not Greek,
Heathen.
You're barbarian. That's correct. So,
yeah, I think that again, context is important in terms of where we are, and I think one of the issues is that when you were talking, I think you were alluding to the canon, and what initially became the canon, what was excluded. Again, if you look at the Catholic Bible, it does include the Apocrypha books.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, someone had to make a decision, and maybe we could have you come back and really just talk about Christianity as this European. a lot of theology and what we have that has moved away from the Semitic root of the religion of practices and what we got. Question. Oh, let's get the last call, and then I have one question. Caller, welcome to the program.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I hear you went to American Baptist College down in Tennessee. I kind of attended there too, and I did a lot of work on it. Put 120 workers in American Baptist College back in the 90s.
Oh, you went to American Baptist?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, me and I was Wisconsin State layman at the time, me and Joe T. Williams and some more guys, preachers that went down and donated some time and money trying to help our people.
Okay.
And then turn around, I went up on a Melville Grade School pastoral studies here in Milwaukee under Hugh Davis, and passed fifth in the class under the guy who owned Fred Jones Pontiac, and we had a beautiful time there, studies. And I remember, there's just the things I went through, but I'm going to this. A lot of folks don't study their Bible for themselves. They listen to everybody else. And then they have these comments on how people judge the Bible. And when they go here, it's not about a study, it's about what you heard. Because if you took time to study, I know that God would have revealed the things that you need to know, so your heart don't be so heavy on how people was treated. We were treated, Black people was treated so poorly. And that's what we gathered in the church. And that's where all our resources were, in the church. Come out the field, and that's where we were able to see other family members. But people don't see these things, that where the Black church helped everybody find a base on their spirituality, but ours was because that's where we was able to come together as a people. And now today, I had to do a funeral yesterday, and the thing here is that there's a lot of our people out here that's unchurched. They say, I don't want to go to church. And these days, that another, I don't send my children because we was forced. But then like I tell them, you send your children to these public schools and let them teach them anything, which if you take time and you send them to church, or you spend time with them, also with the church, and get in that Bible for yourselves and find out who you are spiritually, and stop running around here with all these vices talking about, I'm depressed and I got to smoke all this and I got to drink all that. Because, if you find yourself in God, you'll find yourself a lot more peaceful. But I appreciate you guys being on this morning.
Let me
Thank you.
Let me and this kind of rolls into something that you like to see in March. We talked about the intersection. We talked about religion. We specifically talked about Christianity. We talked about justice. There's the political piece of it. What do we do? And let me say, political is not necessarily partisan. I caution clergy to be careful of partisan participation. That picture that you're in can come back to haunt you, as Bishop Darrell Hines. So what is the role then in terms of seeking justice? And politics is one of those means that we can achieve justice. What do you see the role of the Black church?
My example goes back to the civil rights movement. During that time, especially with King, he had trouble getting Black churches, Black people, to be involved in change that would be for their own good. And part of that was the conservative nature of the church, inherited from, I would say, a white evangelicalism. You were taught to just develop piety, to be quiet, and you on your way to heaven. But King, I agree with what he was trying to do, is that change does not come without some kind of struggle and active engagement. So for a long time, people say, oh, the civil rights movement was a Black church movement. No, it was not. It was a few Black churches that got involved, that put their necks on the line to bring about the kind of change that's being reversed today, or at least attempts are being made to reverse all of those. And not only church, young people got involved. So for me, what I'm hoping to do, as a matter of fact, I'm having a meeting at Community on March 10th. That's a Monday from 9 to 10:30, to try to talk about how can churches be involved in positive social change. So we're not talking about politics, because I think we need to think globally but act locally. we have elections here that can be more important than what happens on the federal level, although a lot's going on there too. But we need churches to be involved and to be politically savvy. Many people were voting for a personality. Oh, I like the way that person talks, but they weren't voting for policies. And now they're seeing what policies do when they are enacted. Well, we weren't expecting that. Well, you need to be politically savvy and not just listen to what people say, but listen to what they plan. And Project 2025 was part of the plan. And now we see it enacted, and people are doing a full 180. Well, I didn't know that. Well, you were told ahead of time what would happen.
It's gonna rain. It ain't raining yet. That's interesting. There was also, when we talk about the dynamic that was going on with black preachers, one of the real divides there was education. That was when you saw the leadership, and you're right. What we begin as we believe is the beginning of the civil rights movement, the Montgomery bus boycott, was not a religious movement. It was widespread. Dr. King later started the Southern Christian Leadership Conference because, he had to separate, which is really fascinating because, they had gotten rid of the social activist pastor prior to them, Vernon Johns, and then they get Martin King. So it was just like, oh, man. So
Poetic justice.
Look at God. But yeah, I think that to be able to have that conversation with folks, and one of the things is really, you would have where you would hear people who were very, very religious, but then hear their father was a pastor talk about his anger about white people, because in spite of what we were doing and all that worship when we went out in the world, it's just like, why is black churches so male dominated? And a lot of reasons, even though males do not make up the majority of the congregation, is the one place black men had power was in the church leadership. Because outside those doors, it may or may not have happened. Got a caller? Caller, welcome to the program.
Yeah, Casey, you were talking about two things. You were talking about slavery, and I'll speed it up. Anyway, you were talking about slavery and everything, how they were trying to justify it. My understanding is that the people knew the differences, but it didn't become until the transatlantic slave trade where they started making the race. I think it was about the 1600s, 1500s, when they started to do that and everything else like that.
White folks is
slave trade began actually in the 1420s.
1440s.
Yeah, with Prince Henry, Portugal.
Yeah, he was taking him up to there. But I'm just saying that from there, as you see, you're talking about them without being Christian. They were doing that because they weren't Christians. But the funny thing about that is, you look at Ethiopia, and now there was a Christian nation, but they got help from the Portuguese. Funny thing about that, they got help from the Portuguese supplying the weapons, because they were fighting off the Muslim, they call them hordes. Because the Muslims were coming down trying to, coming down there trying to convert everybody. And also in the 1890s, the Ethiopians got weapons from the Roman, not the Romans, but they didn't get weapons from the Italians were trying to come down there and conquer Ethiopia in the 1890s, but they got their weapons from the Russian Orthodox Church because they were Christian, and they were able to fight them off in the 1890s. Just for a little history, that's all.
And that is really interesting about, in America it was called Manifest Destiny, that you could expand religion, whether it was Islam, whether it was Christianity, I talk about those two, but the land also went with that expansion. We should not lose sight of when people go in the name of God, that you appropriate a land. What did the Africans say? The missionaries brought us the Bible. We got the Bibles. They got the land. And so when that has always been, that's one of those problematic things. There was something else. I think it was Howard Thurman's grandmother, who would not read Paul. because of slavery.
Slavery.
She would not read it. And I said that slavery was wrong then, whether if the Bible used to justify it's wrong now. Wow, this blew by.
It did.
Let me thank the Reverend Dr. Demetrius Williams again. The book, The Cross of Christ and the African American Christian Religious Experience. You can get this book. This is a great book. I mean, it's a page turner, man. You just go through just the scholarship that goes into it. And the thing that I always love about Pastor Williams is that he put it on street level. We can get it. You know, I mean, and I think that becomes important because you get into all these other things with people. I never forget when I first started preaching, I would regularly quote Shakespeare. They go, who? Because even real quick, someone was Kid Dr. King. And I think he was talking about, he was a big fan of Niebuhr. I think that was his guy. And he said he would just instantly go into it. And they said, Dr. King, they don't know nothing about no Niebuhr. You got to be able to translate it where people can get it. Man, you got to come back.
Thank you, man. I would love to.
Appreciate the Reverend Dr. Demetrius Williams, the pastor of Community Baptist Church. Again, the author of the book, The Cross of Christ, an African American Christian Experience. You can get this book. They can.
Amen. Piety, politics, and growth.
Yeah, we should make it bigger, man.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon.
Thank you. Debo, thank you. Jermaine, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hey, and again, Dr. Williams, thank
I
you.
love, man. Good. And it was good to see you two back there at work.
Yeah, man. You know, stand in the field I love.
Good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. Hope to talk to everybody tomorrow. As always, go for this place in peace.
Oh yeah.